"Pretend to be my bride for a fortnight," the Duke said, and I very nearly dropped the tray of brandy I was carrying. I had served the Duke of Renshaw for 11 years, first as under-steward and then, when old Holloway's knees gave out, as steward of Raymore and Tyre, and in all that time I had never once heard him ask a woman for anything. Command, yes. Instruct, frequently. Ask, never. Yet there he stood in the small library at midnight, still in his riding coat, addressing Miss Lynette Ashworth as though the words cost him some private currency he did not enjoy spending. She was staring at him the way a woman stares at a man who has just suggested she jump from a bridge and trust that the water below is deep enough. "You are not serious, Your Grace." "I am never anything else," he said, which was true, and which was also, I had come to understand over 11 years, the whole trouble with him. I should explain how she came to be standing in that library at midnight in the first place, though I confess even now I am not entirely sure which of the two of them engineered it, the Duke, who denied engineering anything, or fate, which I have found to be a great deal more mischievous than dukes generally credit. Miss Ashworth had arrived at Raymore 3 days prior, in the same carriage as her sister, Miss Cassandra Ashworth, and their mother, Mrs. Ashworth, who had spent the whole of the drive. So the coachman told me, and he does not exaggerate, being a solemn man not given to invention, discussing Cassandra's complexion, Cassandra's accomplishments, Cassandra's prospects, and Cassandra's gown for the first evening's dinner, while Lynette sat by the window and watched the hedgerows go by. I noticed her before the Duke did, which I mention only because it later became a small vanity of mine. She came down from the carriage last, refused the footman's hand because she had already taken it before he offered, and stood a moment looking up at Raymore's gray towers with an expression I recognized at once, because I have worn it myself on mornings when the house felt very large and I felt very small within it. It was not envy. It was a kind of careful bracing, the look of someone who has learned that arriving anywhere new means finding out, within the hour, exactly how much space she is permitted to occupy. Mrs. Ashworth occupied the drawing-room before her bonnet was off. "Is it true, Mr. Pell?" she said to me, for I had gone down to receive them, the Duke being occupied with his aunt's arrival at that very hour, which is a separate catastrophe I shall come to directly, that his Grace is in want of a bride this season. I could not say, madam, his Grace does not confide his wants to me. This was, I admit, not entirely honest. He confided a great many things to me. He did not confide that. "My Cassandra," said Mrs. Ashworth, "is accounted the loveliest girl in 3 counties." "I am certain she is very lovely, madam." Cassandra was, in fact, lovely. I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of a tidier story. She had her mother's fine bones and a laugh like a struck bell, and she was, by every account I ever heard, a good-natured girl who meant no unkindness to her sister. The unkindness, such as it was, did not come from Cassandra's malice. It came from a house, their house, the Ashworth's house in Somerset, which I never saw but heard described often enough to picture, that had decided, long before either girl could object to the decision, which daughter was the treasure, and which was merely the second cup at the table. Lynette had grown up pouring that second cup without complaint. She had grown so practiced at not being looked at that she had nearly convinced herself she preferred it. I did not know any of this on the day they arrived. I learned it the way a steward learns everything in a house full of house guests, sideways, from maids and grooms and the particular silences at dinner, over the days that followed. But I offer it now, out of order, because it matters to what came next, and because a man telling a story owes his listener the truth even when the truth arrives late. Now the aunt. Lady Edith Renshaw, the Duke's father's sister, was a woman of enormous conviction and no capacity whatsoever for being told she was wrong, and she had appointed herself, some months prior, to the sacred work of marrying off her nephew before he turned 35, and, in her words, hardened past use. She had not been invited to orchestrate the house party at Raymore. She had invited herself, and brought with her 3 families of her own choosing, each possessed of an unmarried daughter, each daughter primed like a cannon to be fired at the Duke's unmarried heart the moment opportunity presented itself. The Duke had known nothing of this until Lady Edith's carriage came up the drive with her 3 carefully selected candidates riding inside it like a small invading army, and by the time he understood what had happened, it was too late to close the gates without an unforgivable scandal. "A fortnight," he said to me that first night, pacing his study with the particular controlled fury he reserved for situations he could not solve by simply being taller and colder than the problem. A fortnight of Edith parading debutantes past me like prize heifers, and I am meant to smile and hand round the ratafia. "Your Grace could simply decline to be charmed." "I have declined to be charmed for 6 years, Pell. It has not once discouraged her. She takes my silence as shyness and redoubles her efforts." He stopped pacing. "There is only one thing that has ever stopped Edith mid-scheme, and that is the appearance of a scheme already further along than hers." I did not like the look that crossed his face just then. I had seen it before. On the morning he decided, against every advisor's counsel, to drain the eastern bog rather than sell the timber. On the day he rode out alone in a storm to find a tenant's boy gone missing on the moor. It was the look of a man arriving at a plan so simple in his own mind that he had not yet noticed how it might appear to anyone else. "If Edith believed I had already fixed my interest," he said slowly, "she would have no candidate to press on me. The matter would be settled. She would go home disappointed but harmless, and I would be spared a fortnight of being auctioned in my own drawing-room." "And whose interest, Your Grace, would you claim to have fixed?" He did not answer me that night. But I saw him, the following afternoon, watching Miss Linnet Ashworth across the garden as she knelt to help a small girl, one of the tenant children brought up for the strawberry gathering, retrieve a rolled hoop from beneath a hedge, doing it without any fuss, without calling for a servant, simply solving the small problem in front of her and moving on before anyone had thought to thank her. Cassandra, 20 feet away, was laughing at something Lord Fenwick's son had said, radiant and entirely unaware that her sister had just done anything at all. The Duke watched Linnet a moment longer than a man watches a woman he has not yet decided to speak to. Which brings us back to the library at midnight, and the tray of brandy, and the sentence that very nearly cost me my composure along with the decanter. "You want me," Miss Ashworth said, once she had recovered enough breath to form the words, "to pretend to be your intended bride, for a fortnight, in front of your family. In front of my aunt, principally, and whichever daughters she has brought to throw at me. Your Grace, I have known you for exactly 3 days. I am aware. We have spoken perhaps 4 times, and on 2 of those occasions I was asking you to pass the salt. You have an excellent memory for salt." I confess I made a small sound at that, quickly disguised as a cough, and both of them turned to look at me as though noticing for the first time that I was still in the room holding a tray. I considered withdrawing. I did not withdraw because the Duke had not dismissed me, and because, I will own this plainly, I was curious, in the way a man is curious about whether he suspects is about to change the whole shape of his household. "Why me?" she asked, and there it was, the question underneath the question, the one I do not think she meant to ask aloud. Why me and not my sister? Why me, who nobody chooses? The Duke considered this with the same gravity he gave to matters of tenancy and drainage, which is to say, entirely, as though there were no wrong answer he could afford to give. "Because you are the only person under this roof," he said, "who has not in 3 days asked me a single question about my income, my title, or my opinion of the weather at Bath. You asked me instead whether the tenant boy's leg had healed properly after the fall from the hay cart. I do not believe you were performing an interest in me, Miss Ashworth. I believe you were simply interested in the boy." She did not answer at once. "It would want only a fortnight," he continued, more quietly now, as though he had heard himself and thought better of the force behind it. A show of preference. Enough to send Edith and her candidates home satisfied that the matter is settled elsewhere. At the end of it, we part as friends. You return to Somerset with whatever consideration I can arrange to make the arrangement worth your trouble, and no one is the wiser. And what consideration? She said, with the first flash of dry humor I would come to know very well. Does a duke offer a woman for pretending to love him? Whatever you like, name it. She was quiet a long moment. Then, my sister is to make her curtsy properly next season. My mother has spent what there is to spend on her wardrobe for it. There will be little left over for mine, and less interest in providing it. If I am to play your intended bride for a fortnight, your grace, I should like a season of my own after, not on your charity precisely, but arranged, so that it does not look like charity. A cousin's invitation. A quiet word to the right hostess. I do not ask you to make me anything I am not. I ask only to be seen where I am presently invisible. I have stood in that room many times since, and I have never stopped thinking that it was, in its way, the most dignified sentence I ever heard spoken within its walls. The Duke bowed his head once, as a man bows to a term he considers entirely fair. Done. Then I accept your terms, your grace. She rose from the chair she'd been perched on, smoothing her skirts with hands that were not, I noticed, quite steady. Though I think you should know I have never pretended to be in love with anyone in my life, I may prove very bad at it. You will not need to pretend the fondness, he said. Only the particulars. Fondness, I suspect, you have in ready supply for anyone who troubles to look at you properly. It is only that no one has troubled. She looked at him then in a way that made me, quite without meaning to, take one step backward toward the door, the look of a woman recalculating a man she had thought she understood. There was a further complication I have not yet mentioned, and I raise it now because it bore directly on what came after. Miss Ashworth, before she agreed to anything, asked to see the terms set down more plainly than a midnight conversation allowed. I should like to understand precisely what I am promising, your grace, and precisely what I am not. She had folded her hands in her lap in the manner of a woman accustomed to negotiating from very little ground and determined to hold what ground she had. I will play the part of a woman fond of you before your aunt and her candidates. I will not lie to my own mother and sister about the nature of the arrangement, because I do not think I could sustain a lie inside my own family and still sleep at night. And I will not be made to feel a fool at the end of it, when the fortnight closes and everyone returns to their proper places. Agreed on all counts, the Duke said, though I would ask one thing further of you, which is that you tell me plainly if at any point the performance becomes more than you wish to give. I have no intention of asking you to feel what you do not feel, whatever face we present at dinner. That is a strange sort of promise for a man, arranging a false courtship. It is the only sort of promise I know how to make, Miss Ashworth. I am not practiced in the other kind. I thought, hearing it, that this was truer than either of them yet understood, and that a man who could make so careful a promise about a pretense had already given away a great deal more of himself than he intended. I saw them both out that night, she to the east wing where the unmarried ladies were housed, he to his study to sit up, as he often did, staring at nothing in particular. I brought him a final brandy he did not drink. You know this is madness, your grace. I know it is expedient. Those are not the same word. He looked up at me with something almost like a smile, which on him was a rare enough weather event that I noted the date. No, he agreed. They are not. The fortnight began the following morning at breakfast, and I will say this for Miss Ashworth. She committed to the deception with more composure than I had any right to expect from a woman 3 days into a strange house. When the Duke drew out her chair himself, a service he had never in 11 years performed for any guest, having always left such things to the footmen, She accepted it with only the faintest color rising in her cheeks and said, "You are too good to me, Your Grace," in a voice pitched precisely to carry to Lady Edith at the head of the table. Lady Edith's fork paused in the air. "Renshaw," she said, "you seat Miss Ashworth yourself now. I find myself unaccountably attentive of late, and you must forgive me the novelty." I was pouring chocolate at the sideboard and very nearly poured it onto the tablecloth instead, so dry was his delivery. Cassandra, beside her sister, looked between the two of them with open surprise, and I watched something move behind her eyes that was not resentment. I want to be plain about that, for Cassandra never once showed her sister anything but affection in all the days I observed her, but simple astonishment, as though she were seeing Linnet for the first time in years. Lady Edith did not surrender so easily as the Duke had hoped. Over the days that followed, she deployed her 3 candidates with the tireless strategy of a general who has simply not yet accepted the battle is lost. Miss Farrow was seated beside him at whist. Miss Thorne was arranged to encounter him, by chance, in the Rose Garden. Miss Underwood was prevailed upon to sing after dinner in a voice clearly meant to demonstrate accomplishments Miss Ashworth, so Lady Edith pointedly remarked, had not yet had occasion to display. "Does Miss Ashworth sing, Renshaw?" "Miss Ashworth," the Duke said, "reads Cowper aloud in the evenings in a voice that has ruined every other reader for me permanently. I do not require she sing as well. A woman may be permitted one accomplishment, and my whole devotion besides." This was, I should note, entirely true and also entirely news to me, and I spent a full minute afterward trying to work out when he had heard her read Cowper at all, until I recalled the previous evening, when I had come to build up the fire in the small drawing-room and found the two of them there with a single candle and a book between them, her voice low over the lines, his eyes on her face rather than the page. I had withdrawn without either of them noticing me. I mention it now because I do not think, even then, 3 days into the arrangement, that what was happening between them could any longer be called pretense by an honest man. And I was, whatever else I may be, an honest man, even when it cost me the comfort of pretending I did not see what I saw. There was, before the 5th day, a morning I have thought of often since, though it seemed a small thing at the time. The whole party had gone out walking along the ridge path above the home farm, ostensibly to admire the view of the valley, though I suspect Lady Edith's true purpose was to arrange her candidates at advantageous intervals along the way, like figures placed on a chessboard by a player who has not yet noticed the board has changed shape beneath her. Miss Ashworth had fallen back from the main party to help Mrs. Ashworth's maid gather up a shawl the wind had carried into a hedge, and by the time she rejoined the group, she found herself walking not beside her mother or her sister, but beside the Duke, who had, I later gathered, contrived his own pace to match hers without appearing to contrive anything at all. "You need not slow yourself on my account, Your Grace. I am perfectly capable of catching up unassisted." "I am aware. I am not slowing myself on your account. I find the view improves considerably from this particular vantage." She glanced sideways at him, and I confess, for I was some yards behind with the picnic hampers, close enough to hear and far enough to seem occupied with the business of hampers, that I saw her fight down a smile and lose the fight entirely. "You are a very odd sort of Duke." "So I am told. Usually by my aunt, and usually as a complaint. I do not intend it as a complaint. Then I shall treasure it as I treasure very little else said to me this fortnight." He offered his arm then, over a stile that required no assistance whatsoever to cross, and she took it, and neither of them hurried to release it once they had reached the other side, and I thought, watching them walk on ahead of me with the valley spread gold and green below, that I had rarely seen two people perform an arrangement with less evident effort and more evident feeling. They stopped near the top of the ridge, where the path narrowed and the wind came up sharp off the moor, and he reached out. I saw this plainly, for I had come nearly level with them by then, occupied with a hamper strap that did not, in truth, need-occupying, and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face where the wind had pulled it free of its pins. It was the smallest gesture. His hand did not linger. But I saw her go very still beneath it, and I saw him go equally still at having done it, as though the gesture had escaped him before he had properly decided to make it. And for a moment neither of them said anything at all, while the wind moved between them and did the talking neither seemed prepared to do themselves. "Forgive me," he said at last. "That was not according to our arrangement." "No," she agreed, in a voice gone somewhat unsteady, "it was not." Neither of them apologized further, and neither of them mentioned it again that day, though I noticed, at luncheon on the blankets spread along the ridge, that the Duke passed her the last of the seed cake without being asked, and that she accepted it without protest, and that Lady Edith, watching the small exchange over the rim of her teacup, narrowed her eyes in the manner of a general beginning, for the first time, to suspect that her chessboard had been rearranged by hands other than her own. It was in the garden, on the 5th day, that the pretense first cracked open wide enough for me to see clean through it. I had gone out to speak to the head gardener about the strawberry beds, and came upon the Duke and Miss Ashworth on the stone bench by the old sundial, half screened by the yew hedge, and I confess I did not announce myself as promptly as I ought, because what I saw arrested me. "You did not have to defend my drawing," she was saying. Miss Underwood had, the previous evening, made some pointed remark about the amateur watercolor Linnet had left out to dry on the windowsill of the morning room, a study of the West Folly, competent but unremarkable, the sort of thing any parson's daughter might produce, and had done so, I gathered, precisely to draw a contrast with her own considerably more polished portfolio. I did not defend it. I said it was the only picture in this house that made me want to stand where the painter stood. That is not defense. That is simply true. You are a very poor liar for a man engaged in an elaborate deception, Your Grace. I am an excellent liar, he said. I have simply stopped lying to you. She turned to look at him properly then, and I saw her hands go still in her lap, the restless pleating of her skirt she had done, I'd noticed, whenever nervous, suddenly arrested. That is not part of our arrangement. No, he agreed. It is rather larger than our arrangement, I find. Neither of them moved. I have seen a great many things in 11 years at Raymore. I have seen the Duke face down a drunken poacher with a shotgun and not blink. I have seen him negotiate a debt of £4,000 without his voice once rising. And I have never seen him look as entirely undone as he did on that bench, by nothing more than a woman looking back at him and not looking away. I withdrew before either noticed me, and I did not mention the strawberry beds to the gardener until the following day. That evening, however, I found Miss Ashworth alone in the small drawing-room, standing before the cold hearth with her arms wrapped about herself in a way that told me plainly enough that whatever had passed at the sundial had left her more troubled than pleased, and I confess I overstepped my place, though not, I think, unforgivably. You look, if you will permit me to say so, Miss Ashworth, like a woman arguing with herself and losing. She gave a short laugh that had very little humor in it. Is it so obvious, Mr. Pell? Only to a man who has spent 11 years learning to read faces in this house. I will withdraw if you wish it. No, no, stay, if you do not mind an unburdening. I do not know who else to say it to. She sat finally on the edge of a chair, as though sitting fully might commit her to feelings she was not yet ready to own. I agreed to a fortnight's performance, Mr. Pell. I did not agree to this. It was easier, I find, when I believed none of it was real, when I could tell myself that whatever kindness he showed me was simply good acting, and that I might return to Somerset afterward with my season arranged and my heart entirely intact. I do not know how to want something I have never been permitted to want before. I have spent my whole life training myself out of wanting the thing that goes to my sister. I do not know that I trust myself to want this, without ruining it through sheer inexperience at wanting anything at all. May I offer an observation, Miss Ashworth? from a man who has watched a great many arrangements in this house rise and fall. Please. I have known His Grace 11 years, and in that time I have watched him decline 4 separate advantageous matches proposed by his own solicitor, 2 proposed by his aunt, and 1, memorably, proposed by the Prince Regent's own household, on the grounds that none of the ladies in question had given him any particular reason to prefer them above the general run of eligible women. He is not a man who performs interest he does not feel, Miss Ashworth, whatever his talent for performing indifference. I do not say this to press you toward a feeling you are not ready to claim. I say it only so that you need not spend the remainder of this fortnight wondering whether you are alone in what you feel. I do not believe, from where I stand, that you are. She was quiet a long while after that, looking into the cold grate as though she might find her answer written in the ash, and then she thanked me, quite simply, and I left her to her thinking, and did not speak of the conversation again until she raised it herself much later, when it had ceased to matter whether either of us remembered it precisely. I would like to say the fortnight proceeded smoothly from there, but a house full of scheming relations and unmarried daughters does not run smooth for anyone's convenience, and Lady Edith, sensing, correctly, that something had shifted beneath her nephew's careful performance, grew only more determined to prove the whole arrangement a sham. She struck on the 9th day, at a dinner she had specifically requested be attended by the local squire's family, on the grounds, she said, of neighborly courtesy, though I suspected, and was later proven right, that the true purpose was an audience large enough to make a public humiliation sting. "Tell me, Miss Ashworth," Lady Edith said, over the fish course, in a voice designed to carry, "how did you and my nephew first become acquainted? I find I have never heard the particulars. Renchio is so reticent about his own courtships." The table went quiet in the particular way. A room goes quiet when everyone senses a trap being laid, and no one wishes to be caught standing in it. I was at the sideboard, and I watched Miss Ashworth's face, and I watched her decide, in the space of perhaps 2 seconds, not to lie. "We met, in truth, only a fortnight ago, Lady Edith. My mother brought my sister and me to Raymore with very different hopes than the ones that have come to pass." She set down her fork. "I will not pretend to you that ours has been a long acquaintance, because I think you already suspect it has not, and I find I would rather tell you the truth and let you judge it than continue a fiction I am frankly too poor a performer to sustain under your very excellent scrutiny." I heard from somewhere near the foot of the table Mrs. Ashworth's small strangled gasp. The Duke's hand, resting on the tablecloth, had gone very still. "However short the acquaintance," Miss Ashworth went on, and here her voice, which had begun steady, began very slightly to shake, though she did not stop, "I will tell you what is true, because I think a fortnight is quite long enough to learn a great deal about a man, if you trouble to actually look at him rather than merely at his income. I have learned that he asked after a tenant boy's broken leg before he asked after his own comfort. I have learned that he reads correspondence from his estate manager before breakfast, so that no tenant's trouble waits on his convenience. I have learned that he listens, actually listens, to a woman who has spent her whole life being spoken over, and that he does not seem to find this remarkable, though I promise you, Lady Edith, it is the most remarkable thing that has happened to me in 24 years. She stopped. The table was silent enough that I heard the fire settle in the grate. "Whether that is long enough to justify what has passed between us this fortnight," she said, quieter now, "I confess I do not know. I only know I have not lied about how I feel, whatever else may have begun as a convenience." I looked at the Duke. He was looking at her with an expression I can only describe as a man watching a building he had thought sound reveal, all at once, that it had been made of something far finer than he'd known. Lady Edith, to her very great credit, and I have not always credited her generously in this account, so I will do so now, set down her own fork, and regarded Miss Ashworth for a long moment with an expression that had lost, entirely, its earlier edge. "Well," she said, "that is a more honest answer than I have received from anyone at this table in a decade, including my nephew." She looked to the Duke. "Renshaw, I begin to think I have been wasting 3 perfectly good young ladies, and their mother's patience." "You have, Aunt. Though I did not arrange this to spare you the trouble, I confess I am not sorry for the outcome." "No," said Lady Edith, with a dry look that traveled between the two of them and settled, at last, on Miss Ashworth with something that might almost have been approval. "I don't imagine you are." Cassandra, at the far end of the table, was watching her sister with tears standing in her eyes that had nothing to do with the fish course. And when dinner broke up, she crossed the room and embraced Linnet with a fierceness that told me, more than any words could, that whatever imbalance had grown up between those two sisters over the years had never once come from Cassandra's own heart. "I did not know," Cassandra said low, though I was near enough to hear it. "Linnet, I did not know I did not know any of it. Why did you never say?" "There was never very much to say, until now." "There was always a great deal to say. I simply never asked." It was, I thought, watching them, the truest thing said at that entire dinner, honesty included. But a confession at a dinner table, however moving, does not end a story, and I would be doing this account a disservice if I let it appear that everything untangled itself simply because Miss Ashworth had spoken honestly in front of an audience. The Duke, for all his composure at that dinner, spent the following 2 days in a state I can only describe as thoroughly unlike himself. Short with his correspondence, absent at meals he ought to have attended, and once memorably, standing at his study window for the better part of an hour looking out at nothing at all, until I asked him, with the license 11 years of service had earned me, what precisely he thought he was doing. "I proposed a pretense to a woman I had known 3 days," he said, "and within a fortnight I find I cannot imagine the house, or my life in it, without her in the middle of it somewhere. That is not what I planned, Pell." "No, Your Grace, I don't imagine it is." "I made her an offer of a season, arranged discreetly, as payment for a service rendered. I cannot now go to her and say the terms have changed, that I find I want considerably more from her than a fortnight's performance, without it seeming I am simply refusing to pay what I owe and demanding something else instead." "You might," I ventured, "simply ask her what she wants, Your Grace, rather than deciding on her behalf what she is owed. I have observed in 11 years that you are a man of excellent judgment in matters of drainage and considerably poorer judgment in matters of the heart, chiefly because you insist on solving them alone in a room, as you are presently doing, instead of asking the person actually concerned." He looked at me for a long moment. "You have grown very free with your opinions, Pell." 11 years, Your Grace. "I have earned the freedom." He almost laughed, a short exhale that was, for him, practically a peal of mirth, and left the study without another word, and I did not see him again until supper, by which time something in his bearing had changed in a way I recognized, because I had seen it once before. On the morning he decided to drain the eastern bog against all advice and found, 3 months later, that the decision had been the making of half his tenant farms. I did not witness what passed between them directly. A steward, whatever his freedoms, does not follow a duke into the garden at dusk uninvited. But I gathered the particulars afterward, partly from what I saw with my own eyes at a discreet distance, tending to a lantern that did not, in truth, need tending, and partly from what Miss Ashworth herself told me, weeks later, when she had come to trust me enough to tell a steward such things, which I count among the greater honors of my long service. He found her by the old sundial again. The same bench, I understood later, was to become a fixture of their subsequent life together, worn smooth in a particular spot by the years. And he did not open, this time, with any careful strategy. "I owe you an apology," he said, "and a confession, and I find I do not know which should come first." Try the confession. I find I have grown rather fond of your confessions, Your Grace. When I asked you to pretend, I told myself it was expedience, a practical solution to a practical problem. My aunt, her candidates, a fortnight to be endured. I believed, quite sincerely, that I was asking very little of you, because I did not yet understand that I was asking you to spend a fortnight beside me, and that the spending of it would undo 6 years of very carefully maintained indifference to every marriageable woman in England. That is a great deal to blame on one pretense, Your Grace. I am not finished. The apology is this. I offered you a season as payment, as though what has passed between us these 2 weeks were a transaction to be settled and closed. I find I cannot offer it in that spirit any longer, because I do not wish to close the account. I wish very much to keep it open indefinitely, which is a considerably larger request than the one I made a fortnight ago, and I have no right to make it, except that I find I cannot leave it unmade and go on pretending to you, of all people, when you have been nothing but honest with me, that I feel nothing more than gratitude for services rendered. I understand from what she told me after that she did not answer at once, that she looked at him a long moment in the dusk light, the last gold of it caught along the edge of his dark coat, and that she asked him quietly the one question that mattered. Is this still the pretense, Your Grace? I find I need to know, before I answer you, whether I am playing a part or speaking as myself. There has been no pretense in me, he said, since the 5th day on this very bench when you told me I was a poor liar. I have not lied to you since. I am not lying now. I love you, Linnet Ashworth, not the bride I invented to save myself a fortnight's inconvenience, but you entire, the woman who mends a hoop for a stranger's child and reads Cowper as though she means every line, and tells the truth even when it costs her the safety of a comfortable fiction. I do not want a fortnight. I want the whole of it, however long the whole of it turns out to be. She told me later that she had cried then, which she found mortifying and I found entirely understandable, and that he had crossed the small distance between them and taken her hands, not swept her up, not any grand gesture, simply taken her 2 hands in his, which I have come to think suited them both far better than any grander display would have, and asked her, in so many words, whether she would do him the very great honor of making the pretense true. I have spent 24 years, she told him, being the sister no one thought to ask for. You are the first person who has ever asked me for anything and meant truly to give me more than he took. Yes, Your Grace. Ask me properly, and I will say yes as many times as you like to hear it. He did ask her properly, that same week, with a ring that had belonged to his mother and a question asked on one knee in the same garden, before witnesses this time, Lady Edith included, who wept without the slightest embarrassment and later claimed, to anyone who would listen, that she had arranged the whole match herself through her excellent instincts for character, a claim the Duke allowed to stand entirely uncontested, out of what I choose to believe was genuine affection rather than mere convenience. Mrs. Ashworth, I should say, adjusted to the news with a speed that did her very little credit and me considerable amusement, discovering within the hour that she had, in fact, always considered Linnet her most promising daughter, a revision of history so complete that I heard her repeat it, entirely without irony, to 3 separate neighbors before the wedding took place. Cassandra, alone among the family, seemed to feel the old imbalance keenly enough to address it properly, and did so one afternoon in the rose garden, where I happened to be trimming a hedge within easy earshot. I should have seen you sooner, Cassandra said, not because you have become a duchess. Before that, I should have seen you when you were only my sister. You see me now, Linnet said. That will do very well, I find. I am not interested in keeping accounts of what came before. You were always the better of us. I think I knew it and never said so, because it was easier to be the one everyone praised than to say so aloud. Then say it now, and we shall call it settled. Cassandra did say it at some length, and the 2 of them wept and laughed in the particular mingled way of sisters, mending something that had cracked slowly enough that neither had quite noticed the damage until it was nearly whole again. And I finished my hedge and left them to it, because some conversations are not improved by an audience, however devoted. The wedding itself took place at Raymore in the autumn, in the small stone chapel on the estate grounds rather than in London, which was Lynette's preference, and which the Duke granted without a moment's hesitation, observing that he had had quite enough of grand performances for 1 year and would prefer, for this particular ceremony, an audience of people who actually loved them both. I stood near the back, as is proper for a steward, though the Duke insisted, against all convention, that I come forward afterward to be thanked by name before the assembled company, which I confess undid my composure rather more than 11 years of service had prepared me to expect. I have served at Raymore a good while longer since that autumn, and I have watched the pretense that began in a midnight library become the truest marriage I have ever had the privilege to witness at close quarters. I have watched the Duke, a man I once thought incapable of asking anyone for anything, learn to ask his wife a dozen small questions every day about her comfort, her opinions, her wishes for the garden, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune in having someone to ask. I have watched Lynette, who spent 24 years pouring the second cup at her mother's table, become the woman whose opinion is sought first in every room she enters, not because she demanded it, but because she has never once stopped being exactly the person the Duke recognized on the 5th day of a fortnight neither of them expected to matter. She told me once, on a quiet evening some years into their marriage, that she still thought of that first night in the library, of the tray of brandy and the audacious request, and her own certainty that she would fail at whatever was being asked of her. I was so certain, Pell, that I had been asked only because I was convenient, because I would not embarrass him by wanting too much. And now, Your Grace. She looked toward the window, where the Duke could be seen crossing the lawn toward the house, unhurried, the last light gold along his shoulders, and her whole face changed in the way I had watched it change 100 times since that first fortnight, and will, I hope, watch it change 100 times more before I am done with my service here. Now I know I was never merely convenient, she said. I was only ever waiting for someone to look properly. He looked. That has made all the difference in the world. I believe that is as true and as complete an account as I am able to give of how the Obsidian Duke of Raymore came to marry the sister no one thought to choose, and found, in the choosing, that he had not settled for less than he hoped, but had finally been given more than he had ever let himself want.